Okay, welcome again. Welcome back. So this other question I want to address now is a question on objectivity in history. There is a question, do you agree with the postmodernist argument that there is no truth but only a plethora of interpretation and no objective reality but a plurality of perspective? So I think the way to answer that question is to say that historical knowledge is like a marketplace. One way does not lead into it. So historical interpretation is actually shaped by a number of factors, including the historian's ideological leaning, his preferences, his values, his taste, his his emotions, his creed, his theoretical adaptation, or even premonition. So that would probably be a very good introduction. Historical events cannot be absolutely objective. So that question is it borders on objectivity in history. So the examiner is asking you in this case to comment whether it is possible to achieve or attain objectivity, absolute objectivity in historical analysis or in historical interpretation. So this is absolutely impossible. It is impossible to analyze the past with absolute or complete objectivity. The historian's interpretation, reconstruction, and analysis of the past is often handicapped or affected by several factors, and this is why it is impossible to achieve objectivity. So some of these factors that shape or that limits the pursuit of objectivity includes the epistemological limitation, the innate subjectivity of the human mental process, all right, which I've mentioned that, all right. There is also the choices, which I've mentioned, the premonitions, the emotions, the creed, or ideological stand of the historian. So let me pick them one after the other. Historical interpretation is not possible. Yeah, historical interpretation, in absolute objectivity is not possible because the historian is limited by so many conditions. When I say epistemological limitation, the knowledge, the historian's knowledge on the subject matter, is limited by the available facts and materials available to him to analyze at the moment. So historian's knowledge is only shaped by the enormity or by the paucity of materials at his disposal. A historian trying to understand the cause, for instance, of the Israel-Palestinian crisis, for instance, would not be able to attain some level of objectivity. All right. So his argument, his analysis are going to be constrained by the amount of materials of objective information at his own disposal. So it is possible when you look at, for instance, if you watch CNN and Al Jazeera on this same material. So there is CNN on the one hand that is analyzing the Israel-Palestinian crisis, from a Western perspective, because the Jewish people have a profound historical, cultural, connection, affinity with the US. So the CNN is a US based media outfit organization. So whatever analysis, when you watch, you see some of the subjectivity. So whatever analysis of the Israel-Palestinian conflict that the CNN will project will be laced with some subjective analysis, in the sense that they are writing a way to project the US cultural diplomatic relations with Israel. The same way Al Jazeera, which is an Arabic, which was owned by, was founded by Emir of Qatar, for instance, an Arabic, global media station. writing or publicizing the, documenting or analyzing the Israel-Palestinian conflict would write based on the available evidences which is at our own disposal. Of course, based on proximity to the, Palestinian people. All right. So their analysis or their judgments will be so colored, with some form of, prejudice, biases, conjectures, and most times even exaggeration. So this also it applies to the historical interpretation also. So it is impossible to analyze the past, with absolute objectivity, because no the facts that the historians are dealing with are only a fragment of the entire information that exists on that subject. So historians is only scraping from the surface based on the available evidence or material at his disposal. All right. The other faction is that the historian's conclusions are also predicated, on the influence, of his religion, of his choices, all right, his emotions. So historians could be emotionally attached, to a particular subject, variable, at the expense of the other, and this actually, undermine the essence of objectivity. Objectivity means the ability to present, to analyze a particular event the way they are, without any favoritism, all right, without exaggeration, without supporting, placing value on one, material over the other. So historians' conclusions are always, influenced also based on their belief, on their premonitions, what they have, what they have known about that subject matter, and it could also include their theoretical or ideological leaning. All right. So also is also the fact that historians' craft in interpretation and reconstruction is often affected by echoes, and distortions of the oral tradition, which are usually stored, of course, in human repository. I told you that most times they are, apart from the prejudices, the fact that historical data which the historian is working with are usually stored mostly in human repository before they get transcribed into various libraries or archives, books, and all the stuff. Because some of those data materials are first stored in human repository. Repository means, storehouses, the brain, and that whatever is stored in the brain is subject to diminishing return. So you, as humans, even when you have for one-on-one encounter, with a particular event, you saw an event, when the event occurred, you witnessed the event, your analysis, your reinterpretation of that event, even though you are an eyewitness of the event, it cannot be captured vividly, because historical events are fluid. They are fluid like water. You cannot hold them. Once it happens, you have a glimpse of it. You cannot hold them. They are intangible. So historians could only analyze, produce a fragmentary picture of that event he or she has actually witnessed. So this gives room for the usual of echoes and distortions, all right, in history. According to D.P. Enigin, one of the famous historiographer, he actually noted that feedback occurs in oral traditions when, for instance, extraneous materials usually produced from printed sources is incorporated into the tradition. Most times, a historian trying to analyze a particular event he or she had witnessed would also, because the information are stored in the brain, so echoes will come in. Maybe something he had seen, visually elsewhere. Maybe through electronic media, he had seen a similar event or read something about that event in the newspaper. So in analyzing this, most of the premonitions, the echoes from similar events know that the historians had actually encountered either through reading or through discussions. All of these things will would resonate in the historian's interpretation. So the question, the problem of echo, is also another one. I've analyzed, I've mentioned several factors which could affect, absolute or objective uh, reconstruction of historical account. I've mentioned the epistemological limitation, that is the knowledge level of the historian on the subject. I've mentioned the innate subjectivity of the human mental process, which could be, due to memory loss, age, and all of that. I've mentioned the issue of taste, the choices of the historians, his emotion, his creed, all right, his theoretical or ideological leaning could affect it. And I also mentioned the issue of echo. Also these are issues that limit the pursuit of objectivity. So if you say yes, I agree with the postmodernist argument that there is no truth but only a plethora of interpretation. So whatever the historian is given in this sense is only a function, a product of his own interpretation, which could have been affected by all these factors I've mentioned, by echoes, by his personal preferences, his own choices, emotions, and religion and creed, and all of this. So I would talk about the issue of echo, which I've mentioned, which is very, very important for you to understand. So the problem of echo is one of the major determining factor, in historical interpretation, because it gives feedback, from other related events. Historians tends, a non-professional historians, pardon me, will be tempted to bring to bear certain illustration and allusions from other events, to corroborate or to justify his own allusion. So feedback occur, as I've mentioned, when extraneous informations, extraneous information crept into the analysis of the historians, and this actually make it compromise the integrity of historical analysis. So feedback has affected oral materials, historical interpretation, throughout historical time, and space. It is absolutely correct to say that there is no complete objectivity. It is impossible to write a historical piece with absolute objectivity. Historians, reconstructions are affected by some of these factors that I've mentioned. All right. So there's also the fact that the practice of oral history, particularly the storing of information through eyewitness account, is based on certain assumptions too. For once, it is assumed that the past event can be gathered from available oral traditions and from the testimonies of people living in the present, which is false. All right, because even though people witness an event, for instance, let me give you an illustration again. If you go to a football pitch, all right, and even with the advancement in technology and digital cameras and all of that, it is not possible to objectively capture every activity on the pitch simultaneously, even with all the paraphernalia of technology. So the best a sport historians could do is a fragment. So for instance, where the camera itself is positioned along where the key activities, where the football is, all right, so the other part of the pitch are neglected. So historians trying to present a full account of a sport, a football activities between two clubs, for instance, would not still, even in spite of the development and advancement of technology, present an objective account of this particular event, because even the camera itself is centered on a particular scene where the football is centered. That is why when you watch football, most times they have introduced a new strategy to when you want to decide whether a player had committed a foul, all right, or probably gave his opponent an elbow. If it's within the penalty area, the referee would have to go back, call on the computer room, they have to replay the scenario for the so even in spite of that, it is still impossible to attain absolute objectivity. So the practice of oral history is based on certain assumptions, and it is assumed that the past can be gathered from available oral tradition, which is not. And this is why historians' interpretation is affected. So historians could just give based on the facts available to them and his ability to also process those facts. So it is assumed also that the practice of gathering people's testimonies and also interpreting them, should be based on the nature of memory, the narrative, the identity, the performance, the subjectivity, and power. So these are key factors, in historical that limit the pursuit of objectivity. All right, how the historians narrate, is create his discourse, or create his narratives. They are shaped by memory issues. All right, how much can he recapture from the past? They are shaped by his identity, his class. What class does it belong to? Does it belong to the bourgeois class, the bourgeoisie, the capitalist class? A historian, who belongs to a particular class will definitely undermine, the interest of the other classes in a society. All right, for instance, if a society is pro-capitalist, so no matter how, I have a paper that I'm writing now, report. The paper was very, very critical of capitalism, and when the paper was sent to the journal sent it to reviewers. It is clear from the report I got from these reviewers that the reviewers were a bunch of pro-capitalists. So from their critique, it shows their biases against people who do not adhere to capitalist philosophies. So this limit objectivity in historical interpretation. Then the performance, this the art of writing, the way the historians reconstruct, the power it places over the discourse are also critical factor which limits the pursuit of objectivity. So it is difficult to capture the past, in mythology synonymous with a people that have been severely altered by several accounts. So when when a dominant account had been saturated over the year, so it is very, very difficult for a historian to also want to interpret his account in a very, very difficult, in a strange manner, in a contradicting manner, because of the power of discourse. So there is also the controversy as to whether the past actually exists or it is just a figment of the historian's imagination. This is also a question. So historians are often questioned about the authenticity of the interpretation of the reconstruction, because since those information, every historical analysis are based on first primary evidence, no eyewitness account. And so the question of how true, how just is some of this information presented by the historian. And historical reconstruction indeed requires assembling mass of verifiable facts. That is why it is very important for historians to assemble various evidences, and analyze them according to merit, according to their merit. So the reconstruction requires assembling masses of verifiable facts and claims and arranging them based on a series of events, generally probably through chronology and other. So Atomawick, in conclusion, has noted that events of the past themselves do not constitute history. Okay, because the past, as I've mentioned, is fluid, is intangible, but yet the historian has to reconstruct the past sequentially based on verifiable evidence. So what is important, essential to extrapolating knowledgeably from oral history, especially when dealing with pre-literate societies, involves critical evaluation and the historian's ability to distinguish between historical conjectures, guesses, if someone is guessing, and verifiable claims. So even though it is not possible to achieve objectivity, even though historical interpretation is based on plurality, plethora of interpretation, and plurality of perspective. All right. It is also important for the historians to place merit on their judgment. All right, so they have to verify every claims rather than taking one claims from one variables and imposing it on the other. Historians must subject them to critical judgment and analysis. So it is important to be sufficiently grounded in historical understanding to bring reliable historical analysis to bear in the reconstruction of the past. So what is mostly required, as I usually tell my own PG students in classes I teach, is that is a mastery of what Friedrich Nietzsche once termed critical history, and what Gordon Craig has explained as the ability, after painful inquiry and sober judgment, to determine what part of the oral evidences verifiably correspond with the general historical trajectory explanations. And this is one of the means. But the appeal of history lies in its romance with facts. Its real value is the process of weighing evidence and evaluating them accordingly. So lastly, in conclusion, I would say that the historian seeks objectivity but can never be fully attained. Objectivity cannot be fully attained based on the factors I've mentioned. I've mentioned the epistemological limitation, the knowledge of the historians on the subject, his ideology, his creed, his emotions, or his feelings, his theoretical adaptation, then the question of distortion of the oral evidences and information, echoes, which I've mentioned about. All these are the factors that that made the historian, that could make a historian to interpret a particular event variously. If you put 5 historians in a room to analyze a particular event, so most of them are going to produce very different interpretations. So this is based on what I've mentioned. All these factors, echoes, all right, their tastes, their choices, their preferences, their theoretical adaptation, all right, and all of these, the diminishing return, even when they are eyewitness of this account, all of these, but yet inaccessibility of the old past does not excuse, is not an excuse to discard the portion attainable. So historian must be very critical, must be thorough. Historical inquiry must strive towards objectivity, realizing that fact is something we cannot process in a while, so in a whole rather. So historian must tread cautiously in its interpretation, must be detached. There's what we call relative distance, the principle of relative distance in historical interpretation. That means historians must remove his or herself from the analysis, and be a biased umpire, a biased referee. All right, you analyze based on the merits of the materials. This is what the question is saying. So it is, it is true that the postmodernist argument that there is no truth but a plethora of interpretation, and plurality of perspective. 2 historians or 10 historians writing on the same thing cannot write the same thing. They have to write differently based on their choices, based on their ability to critique their materials. Thank you.